Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We have two terrific poets with us today, Jim Natal and Peggy Dobreer. Jim will read first and then Peggy. Jim Natal is the author of the recent chapbook, Etude in the Form of a Cross, and 5 full-length poetry collections, including Spare Room, Albun Variations, and Memory and Rain. His work has appeared widely in journals and anthologies. A multi-year pushcart nominee and a longtime literary presenter, he is co-founder of Conflux Press. Here's a splendid poet, Jim Natal.
Well, thank you, Harry. Thank you. And thank you for the invitation to be part of this wonderful series. I ran series for so many years, and I know what goes into doing this, as I think, Peggy, you did too. So we know what you do to keep this running. So thank you for that. And also I want to thank Allegra, who was so helpful out in the ether there with the emails back and forth. I'm really happy to be here and this pre-holiday reading. I'm actually going to start with 2 old poems, 2 short old poems that were written about 15 years ago. And sadly, they're still relevant. 2 hummingbirds explain the Middle East situation. 2 hummingbirds, one Arab, one Jewish, or if you will, one Sunni and one Shia, have discovered the new feeder we hung less than 2 hours ago. But as soon as one stops hovering long enough to sip, the other zips, cheeking and chiding and chittering from the Goliath juniper on the neighboring property and drives it off. This goes on all morning. So much aviation and expenditure, while the syrup in the jar remains untasted. Uprooted. The very best olive oil burns the throat, makes you cough. 1 cough is good. 2 coughs, preferable. 3 coughs are exceptional. The very best olive oil comes from ancestral trees. When bulldozed and plowed under, your eyes water, tongue ripens so bitter, you're unable to speak for years. This is a new piece called Indistinct. Now I remember thin rites on a cold night. Now I remember you sitting, legs outstretched on a bench in a rustic train station. Was it Italy? Yes, I think it was Italy. It comes back. Permanent fragment, like bone bits in a funeral urn, never to be scattered. You're transfixed on that hard wooden bench, regular quick glances at your wristwatch, the clock on the wall, bag beside you on the tile floor that's been chipped by thousands upon thousands of wheels, leather luggage with brass reinforced corners. I was there too, the eyes behind the camera, mind entombing images, snap, snap, my hand flat between us on the slats of the bench, not holding yours. Now I remember staring at the floor, counting tiles, recognizing, rearranging the pattern, centuries-old design that survived the history of the place. The landscape outside the station scarred as the wired glass over the face of the clock. All those ghosts waiting for trains or never boarding. Passengers who fail to arrive or arrive to an empty platform. The whistle, screech, rumble, then down the tracks and into a tunnel. But we're still there, already drab colors fading. A set piece seen through sheer curtains, a diorama, a tableau. Was it France? Maybe it was France. As I'm sure many of you out there, especially those in the Los Angeles area, know, Hollywood used to be called, and when it was initially developed, it was called Hollywoodland. And the sign reflected that. It was that long, and it's been shortened, of course, since then. This poem is called Hollywoodland. I don't like driving where I'm not sure where I am. Basically, flying by instrument, as in so much of my life. The only things recognizable being gang signs and graffiti on every brick or stucco surface, the strip malls with their taqueria supremos, walk kings, falafel palaces, shoulder to shoulder. Ubiquitous lotto liquor stores behind corroded expansion grates guarding any form of glass. And I remember trying to learn my way around the traffic through neighborhoods leading to where you used to live, the room you rented in the divorce house in the canyon beneath the Hollywood sign. I disregarded my own rule. You were what was called in those LA dating days, GU, as in geographically undesirable. Still, I'd navigate blocks of wooden bungalows, workmen's beaters trucks parked out front, shaggy palms leaning beneath the weight of evening sky. I'd pass the classic motion picture lots near Gower, studios wheezing but still breathing. The side streets that kept getting narrower, stop signs at nearly every intersection. Up Fountain, beyond Highland, and the outdoor bowl, before turning left off Franklin between the stone gates with the bronze plaques commemorating the subdivision that used to be. Then into the windings among homes of those who would always be richer. How was I to know we'd marry, work our jobs, have a daughter and a divorce house all our own, deal with illness, disappointment, disaster, diminishment? Olympic Boulevard, San Vicente, Centinela, Venice. It's different back here in the known universe. I've been writing over the past couple of years a lot of what's termed eco-poetry. And it's pretty hard not to find subject matter all around, unfortunately, and to address that. And that's our job as poets. And I think it's kind of a reverse inspiration, I guess you'd have to call it. This poem is called "To Be is a Verb." And at the end of the poem, there are some lines that are actual newspaper headlines. To be is a verb. Water drains from bottle, enters body to be rationed among organs and cells. Another liquid day begins in another year of drought. A singular heron flies over, no wings or line of sight, just a honk in the sky on its way to or from its roosting tree and the crusted, stultified canal. How long can this go on? This back and forth, this expansion and shrinking, with expansion losing out and shrinking becoming the pervasive mode. I've read that Great Salt Lake has lost much of its greatness, down 2/3 and on track to become flats of toxic dust. My daughter's new home is there. The Salton Sea bodes perilous too. A puff, a gust, and its hazmat bathing suits beside the pools of Palm Springs, La Quinta, Rancho Mirage, Sel Mau. Satellite imaging, wildfire smoke permitting, shows anemic snowpacks, glaciers advancing backwards in reverse time lapse, death march of Antarctic ice, Vegas golf courses, Phoenix spas, Valley homeowners flouting lawn restrictions a few 100 miles from sudden withered desert towns that tumbleweed away. Next wave refugee camps will be environmental. The political causes exhausted, baked, starved beyond denial. Why don't they act? Is posited from space. Potential environmental nuclear bomb. A disaster. We're at the precipice. It can actually happen. A sip of water, a singular heron calls in morning fog. Mars. Didn't you learn anything last time? Are you so willing to retread your mistakes? Ignorance, greed, bigotry, narrow-minded intransigence have only grown wider, deeper, roots of invasive species massing, strangling blooms, suffocating bulbs, then all planted over in favor of thirsty cash crops. Cereal bowls, dust bowls, topsoil blown away again in cataclysmic heat, the red desert, red dust overwhelming. Crouch down, feel clumps crumble between your fingers, even while wearing thick gloves on the next planet over. And I'm going to close with a poem, I guess, unintentionally in tune with the meditation, the ending of the meditation before the program began. This is a poem called Gratitude, the Gospel according to Arnie's accountant. I know enough to know I don't know enough, and I know enough to be grateful. So many reminders of what can go wrong and does. So many wheels within wheels, turning, grinding. DNA daisy chains twist. The luck of the draw and the draw of luck. Go home. Be happy you've got one. Say thanks at every opportunity. You don't have to wait for the turkey to be set upon the table. It's even less than brief, a blur, then gone. Be cautious or be bold, but no matter how hard you try, there's always a split second of inattention. The campfire spark that drifts away, the dropped knife caught by the blade. It's reflex. It's reaction. It's natural. Hoard or share, accept or deny. You can make it. You can spend it, but you can't keep it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Jim, for that wonderful reading. You have such a calm, intelligent, reassuring voice and a strong narrative and superlative use of language. And I love the last poem, Gratitude. You know, living here at MPTF, gratitude is one of the most important things wherever you are. You know, gratitude and empathy are important. And your poetry is elegiac and loving. And you also have such precise observations of the external world. Could you tell me when you wrote your first poem?
Yeah, well, I can't give you an exact date, but I was in high school. It was back in way back when, and it was like in early 1960s. And it's funny. I remember the beginning of that poem, and I have looked everywhere over the years, and I've never been able to find the whole poem. But I did remember the beginning of it, and it turned out that I used it as a prompt to write another poem. But that first one goes way back then, you know.
And what is it about the poetry form that attracts you to it?
I don't know. I think it's probably the music, and it's also the way that my expression comes out. I mean, I can write prose, and I can write. You know, I wrote advertising copy for years. You know, it's not a problem. But when I try and express the thoughts that I have, the feelings, it just comes out in poetry, and it's just this unending form of interest, just learning about it and practicing and trying to improve and learning the forms. You know, writing. I've been writing in the high bun form a lot lately, and that's an old Japanese form that goes back to the 1600s and the famous poet Basho. And I have two full collections written in that form, and that was a total learning experience. You know, I never claimed to write classic Japanese poetry because I'm not a classic Japanese person, but you know, I can certainly, you know, I can write my version of it, and it's just been a real enlightenment for me.
What are a couple of the poets that influenced you before you began writing in a serious, regular way?
I think there've been a number. I mean, there were a number of them, but T.S. Eliot. I still think that, you know, I may be in the minority these days, but I still think the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock is one of the greatest poems ever written. As I got a little better, I wrote poetry through college and then stopped when life got in the way and a career. And when poetry came back to me in the 90s, the poets that I was reading at the time and who really influenced me were particularly Gary Snyder and Philip Levine. I really loved their sensibilities. Actually, Gary Snyder even before that time. And, and there have just been so many. Naomi Nye is just absolutely wonderful. And there are just so many. I mean, Mark Doty, one after the other, you know, and I was fortunate enough to, because I was a literary presenter, I got to meet many of these people and hear them, and you know, they're remarkable. They're just remarkable artists, each in a distinctive way.
If you look at T.S. Eliot's work, his complete works, he doesn't have a lot. And, you know, I had a professor in college said that he never repeated himself. I love four quartets. I also love the one you mentioned, Love Song to Prufrock. Gary Snyder would be my choice for the Poet Laureate of the United States. And you're akin to him and your precise observations of the external world. When you sit down to write a poem, Jim, what comes to your mind? Do you have an image, an idea, an emotion, words? What kicks off a poem for you?
I rarely start from an idea. I don't think you can sit down and have an idea of what you want to write, unless there's some topic. But I don't think it comes, at least it doesn't come that way for me. You can write an article that way or an essay, but I don't think you can write a poem that way. When I sit down, I often have a phrase or a word, something that comes to me. It could be something in a dream. It could be something I saw in a newspaper, especially the environmental things. It's just a feeling. And sometimes, I'm just walking down the street or just sitting around, I end up, I'll say something to myself. It just comes out of me. And I go, oh, wait a minute. And I've learned enough that, the ones that come in dreams, I know enough now that I didn't used to know it, but I know now to write it down, just put it in my phone or just write it, because thinking that it's going to be there for you in the morning is a mistake, because it's often not anymore. And, but that's what I usually start with, is something like that, unless there's a spark from another poet I've heard or a poem I've read, and I start thinking about a line or something.
One of my favorite titles is Delma Schwartz's short story, "And Dreams Begin Responsibilities." So I've always loved that. And I like, to execute what comes to you, to get up, as you say, and write it down, take the time to take the time. You mentioned you being a presenter. Could you tell us a little bit about that? What you have done in that realm?
Sure. Well, I was part of a group that bloomed from the Midnight Special Bookstore reading. They had a reading series down there in the mid-'90s when I first came back to poetry. And I got together with the group, and we, after Midnight Special closed, we went on to found a reading series that lasted for a number of years at a couple of venues, most notably the Rose Cafe. We were at the Rose for a long time. And then Jeanette Clough and I moved the series over to the Barnes & Noble in Santa Monica, because they have that absolutely exceptional and exquisite little reading room that no other Barnes & Noble in the country has. And so we did that for 6 years. And then I went on, I did one at Antioch University when I was getting my MFA. And then later I moved to Arizona for a short time to Prescott. And I was teaching at Yavapai College, a very nice community college. And they asked me to start a series there, which I did. And even after I came back to California, I continued to run it from here. And I ran that series for 14 years. I just recently, last May, let it go, deciding that 25 years of presenting was about enough. I think it's time to focus on my work, But it was really, it's a community service. You know that. I mean, it's not just featuring famous poets. Anybody can feature, can pay or feature someone to come and read. But, it's getting the up and coming poets and encouraging younger poets to find their voices and to help people develop. I mean, a lot of people I know, especially in the Los Angeles area, who are now well-established poets. I remember their first reading at the Rose Cafe when they were terrified to read, and now they're the pros. It's wonderful to be able to nurture and encourage poetry and poets.
I always say poetry is grace and grace is giving, and you've given a tremendous amount, not only through your own poetry, but your contributions to the poetry community. So thank you for that. We have about a minute left. Could you just tell us briefly how you make a living, or how you have made a living in your life?
You mean other than the multi-million-dollar poetry industry? Yeah. Well, I for a long time, for 25 years, I worked for the National Football League as a creative executive. And after I went back and got my MFA, I was teaching. And I also run a small press here in Los Angeles that prints primarily poetry. With my wife, we founded it back in the mid-90s. And she's an absolutely wonderful, exceptional graphic designer and handmade book artist herself. So we get to put together our talents, you know, my writing and editing and her design and art skills.
Well, thank you.
And it's called Conflux Press, by the way.
Conflux Press. You know, I think I misspoke your book of poetry. I was just having trouble with the light. It's Hat Bun Variations in Memory of Rain, preceded by Spare Room.
Yeah. Well, Spare Room is the High Bun Variations. That's one of the 2 High Bun books. The other's 52 Views. Yeah. Okay.
Well, thank you for that correction. And thank you once again for a fabulous reading, Jim Natal. And our next poet is Peggy Dobreer. Peggy Dobreer has written 3 collections of poetry, 2 with Moontide Press, In the Lake of Your Bones, 2012, and Drop and Dazzle 2018, and a recent chapbook from Glass Lyre Press titled Forbidden Plums, Poems in Quarantine. She has been nominated 4 times for the Pushcart Prize. Dobreer is host of Slow Lighting Daily Online Somatic Writing Practice, which originated at the suggestion of LA Treasure international novelist Janet Fitch in January of 2021. Edited by Dobreer, Slow Lightning has produced 2 anthologies, most recently Astonished Poetry. Here's a superb poet, Peggy Dobreer.
Harry, thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm remembering, if I'm not mistaken, that I met you and Jim on the same day at the Small Press Festival that I hosted at the Church in Ocean Park. And I remember that your booth was in the southwest corner of the room. And as the afternoon went on, there were beautiful stained glass windows along the side. I'd look back into that corner and you all would be lit up by these colored lights. And that was my introduction to you. So I'm honored to be here. Thank you. Thanks again.
Thank you.
And I thought I would start with poems by somebody else. Since the pandemic, I've been teaching a lot of embodied poetry online and developing online community through meditation and writing practice. And so I find it really important to read poetry, to know what's going on in people's minds and hearts about what's going on in the world. This is from a book called Odan de Anstelbar, Ode to the Insatiable, by my niece by marriage, the lovely actress Heita Henson, who you might know as Tatiana on Peaky Blinders. This is page 114, and it's untitled. We are in our 30s. And we don't want to hear how without marriage or a child we are. We want the city to chew us up and spit us out a new person. We want to drink us in silence, feed ourselves full of what we are. We want to make use of our privilege first and foremost by healing for generations. So much travels through our blood, screaming for attention. We want to know what we're dealing with before we decide how to relate, before we teach what is wrong or right or why. We are wild. That's how we like it. We want to dance outside the rhythm, live our impetuous desires, and never, ever again color with the lines another drew for us. And I want to also read one by David Francis, who was part of the original group of Slow Lightning. when he does come and visit, he comes from Australia now. Some of you may know him from the Penn Center. This is Hollywood Morning. The purr of the cat on my lap melds with the purr of a distant jackhammer vibrating, with the whirring propeller of a police chopper nearer the hills, with the stabbing of a young woman who works at the furniture store down the street, that she had to be white, that he had to be homeless and black. What are we to do with that? Grieve for her family, for his, all the unhinged and addicted and abused, the thousands who live on the street within a mile of here, as we lock up the doors and try to set up the new Brinks security system, spend hours on the phone to the Philippines, wondering if Brinks should have stuck to security vehicles instead of houses. And why does every TV show begin with a dead girl in the woods outside Stockholm or Madison or rural Wales? And why can't we stop watching? And why do I secretly wish the furniture girl had been shot, not stabbed, so I could rail on some more about guns on the street? As I look out my attic window at the young homeless man who appears from the gap between our fence and the empty house next door, he's peeing or shooting up, but he's sleeping rough. Maybe he was the one who stashed that blonde wood Amish rocking horse over there, the one I purloined and polished and set beneath the French windows because it looked so good with the curtains and the trim. Maybe that horse was all he had. Maybe that's America. And then I thought I'd read one of my own from this book. This is the second Slow Lightning Astonished Poetry that Harry just mentioned, and it just came out last week, filled with 24 writers who come on a daily basis as their schedules permit. And boy, it's hard to select your own poems for a book you're editing. This one is called Vivipary. Let me introduce you to my pregnant singularity. Here is misinformation, misrepresentation, misunderstanding, and her past misunderstood. Welcome the branded who lead the blind. Just shimmy your hinges and let yourself be undone. Inertia, it turns out, abuts action. There is actual atomic matter, and what won't matter at all under the long arc of justice gavelled by 4 chambers and 4 more years. Caliber, blood type, and oozing of every man and womb. Abort, woman and her absence on the wheel of honor, time, and its legacy left at the gate. Abundant births and a seed before planting, tomato, blood moon, violence, its daily debut in America, Iran, Ukraine, and who still remembers the legacy of San Bushman, one origin made flesh. Instead, we multiply our multiplicities, sanctify ripples that reach into every crevice, once precious, now cherry-picked over. The resin Buddha rests on one languid elbow. Ito and his lady love remain unmoved A day like sand seeps out from underfoot. So I felt like these three poems really dealt with a lot of issues that tend to bombard us. And of course, we're being bombarded by war. And what I've noticed in the morning group is that more and more people are remembering their own connections to war, their own losses, their own wounds. And this is a poem of mine that talks about some of my family wounds. In the now of what back when. In a turret room lined with costume racks and the musty scent of stage and sweat is a bell without a clapper in a church come theater haunt on the top of Founder's Hill. At the rock at the bottom where we circled into long versions of Kumbaya and Teach Your Children Well, sung into the night, swaying through one body to the next. We were voicing our protest to protect each other from the draft, from bombs willy-nilly across a great target swath, the impersonal assault, the women, the children, the children. My cousin Marty was a medic, Green Beret, went in with a beanie to label the dead and triage the losses. He traded little Joe for a sack of rice and his helmet. He had a spare. Little Joe had nothing left but his mother's limp hand, which my cousin replaced with his dog tags. That tin, the shiniest metal Joe had ever seen. He traded his mother's hand for a charm, a campsite in Da Nang, for a concrete swimming pool in Tarzana. Joe died last year in Alaska, where he'd settled with 4 kids of his own. I wondered what I could possibly hand them to take them away from the now of what was given back then, the women, the children, the children. So, gosh, when we started Slow Lightning, it was to find whimsy, to turn away from the news. But as the news has gotten more and more intense over the last 4 years, as poets, it feels impossible to do that. And we call that turning into the skid. But in this case, I want to read something on a happier note. Well, it starts out on a happier note. I had the pleasure of meeting the singer Pirla Bataya at Beyond Baroque, and I became a huge fan. There's something in her voice that touches something very ancient in me. And over the years, we became friends, and she invited me to read with her at the Jewish Festival in La Jolla last year. This is Dearest You, after In the House of Cohen by Pirla Bataya. Oh yeah, I should say that Pirla sang with 20 years with the poet Leonard Cohen. And this concert in particular was in honor of Leonard. I wish you could have seen the depth of the wings. A poet could get lost in the ropes and weights. I wish you could have heard the oud transcend the room, strings on reverb to the master's touch, wind blowing in on the scent of sumac. I wish you could have seen her fingers stiletto across the keyboard, her smile a chord well played. I wish you had heard the care in the balance, felt the bottom on the wood box drum. I wish you could have measured the lines on the face in my mind when we felt Leonard swagger the room, the pages of the flame scorching the stage with ancient light. I wish you could have seen the light off the tear-eyed gent when he tried to remember the last time Cohen gavelled his poems on this stage. Was it 5 years ago already? Asked the man with the $20 bill. Nearly 10, I said, while Perla signed his CD, not sure if I really knew. I wish you could have heard Perla's tribute song, dressed in black and white like she and Leonard, stories looping with my forgotten praises, lost in a history I am used to forgetting. I wish you could have seen the Holocaust exhibit across the hall from the theater that shadowed my quiet preparation and shook me silly down to my DNA. And here's one that I think is kind of fun. This was a commission from the amazing poet Nikhil Davis, who has a poem on a new book called, can't remember the name, The Fracture of Language, The Fraction of Language. Forgive me. Anyway, lovely book. And she talks about whether or not we really love anybody with our whole selves. And she commissioned us each to write a poem based on a certain part of the body. And I picked the pineal gland because it is known as the seat of the spirit. And I think, how can we love somebody without understanding the seat of our spirit? And more it became a teaching poem because so many of us don't really know what the pineal gland is. Pure wind of the body. I could have come in disguise for this pineal poem, dressed as the Eye of Horus or the myth of Genesis, but I am a tiny organ, thought to contain the switch box of our being, our most singular and pre-encoded hormonal distributor, lodged mid-center between our lobes of brain and matters of the spirit, the cone of the Fibonacci oracle, a spiral symmetry named for pine cone, pine apple, an icon on the headdress of Kali or scepter knob of Neptune. There is no right or left to this naked part, no mirrored halves, dual chambers or lobes, only the whole, the continuity of one, and yet oddly so, also known as third eye. But let's not get off on that tangent. Pineal is the only stand-alone gland there is on the body temple grounds, perfectly balanced over a fountain splay of final fluid in constant primordial percolation, annexial intersection of interoceptive circuits, our circadian Sherpa, if you will, rhythmic reveler leading us to our dreams, captain of rest and liminal mystery, busker at the crossing of nerve and endocrine systems, a luminous darkness, or even denser light matter, keeper of the day's hour, visceroceptive receptor and sexy cycler or bioconductress, the body's personal astronomical clock at the very hub. Descartes named the pineal the seat of the soul. He believed that tiny spirit animals break from the gates of sleep in a psychedelic wakefulness like lightning when it hits mid-flight in midnight. Either way, people give little credence to anything unrational from Descartes anymore. But it does give you something to ponder when you roll over next to your lover and open your first and third eye on the day. And I have one more here, Harry. I think that's okay. This is called Particle Wisdom, and I'll finish with this one. If every cell holds the entire coding of our being, then does every particle of stardust hold the entire universe? When the lifeline falls flat, does the spirit flee, or does it remain, ears wide askance, looking for a dose of closure, a zipper, a hook, a door with a lock and screen, a consolation or cancellation, a loss found in rain? When the sky falls dark at the end of a long road through Humboldt County, a hitchhiker manages to convince me past the main road to a winding frontage that takes all my attention to follow in the dark. In the back seat is an Indian blanket Roland gave me off the back porch to keep my legs warm on the long drive to a tree stump hollowed by lightning. When lightning hits a redwood, does the tree become afraid of rain, refusing sustenance for fear of its companion? And I don't mean to answer these questions, only to pose them, propose them, purpose them for future wisdom, particle by particle, to reveal some simple truth we might need about the nature of being.
Thank you, Peggy. Did you have any more poems to read, or was that your final poem?
I thought I was out of time, but I do have a few more if you'd like me to continue.
Well, would you like to read one more poem and then we'll talk a few minutes?
Sure. That would be fantastic. I'll read something about San Francisco. And this was a poem inspired by Nazim Hikmet. The Glistening. I didn't know I loved the wide arms of the plum, holding her fruit till plunging below late summer. I didn't know I loved the dull wooden fence that plated my secret cove. I didn't know I loved Chinatown at 3 a.m., herbs and roots, fish eyes and steam, pungent in windows. I didn't know I loved the slender heads of Modigliani's women, their brains elongated by his keen sense of line. I didn't know I loved the ranunculus patch in front of the art museum, Shakespearean sonnets being sung out on the avenues. I knew I loved my freedom and the Presidio and the most lovely harp made from the jawbone of a whale. And I knew I would now be happy with no less, so I rode cable cars when I needed redress, ate raw salmon on Fisherman's Wharf, oysters off tiles at Swan's Depot, and chips drowned in vinegar on Polk Street. But who would have guessed I would come to love rain, walking till drenched in the keen emerald eye of the twinkling Marina Green.
That was such a wonderful ending of your poetry. You gave such a warm and loving reading, and your poetry just shows your care and for others, and also your poetry is precise, it's complex, it's abundant, heartfelt, sagacious, full of camaraderie and empathy. So thank you very much. I love that last poem, as I did all the other poems that you chose. When did you write your first poem, Peggy?
Well, I think in the 6th grade, I was asked to memorize "O Captain, My Captain." And it was the first attempt attention I ever gotten from my stepfather. He went right to the shelf and knew just what page it was on. And so I started writing poems thinking that would be the deal. That it would, right? So that was when. And then for years I got into theater and dance, and then as a second career came back to poetry after injuries. Yeah.
Well, I memorized and recited "Oh Captain, My Captain" in the 5th grade in a country schoolhouse and in front of my 5th grade class. So I'm right there with you on that one.
Can you still do it, Harry?
No.
Oh, I was going to say that would be a great duet.
Yeah, that was Whitman's favorite poem, but he just got tired of reading it. He always has to, recite that poem. What attracts you to the poetry form?
I think, well, at first I loved reading it because, my physical expression was taken away after injuries, and I couldn't dance anymore. And so I was like, oh, I need some way to express myself. But the more I'm involved in it, the more I enjoy the transformative nature of poetry, how it connects me to all generations. The more I teach, the more I learn from people. I like sitting in a room and being read to. I love that.
The poetry, I think I mentioned it, but if I didn't, it's full of grace. And so thank you for that. Both you and Jim, really a pleasure. Who are some of the poets that influenced you before you began to write poetry in a regular, serious way?
A lot of the poets that inspired me to go deeper into it were the local poets that were being presented by Red Hen Press, by Beyond Baroque, The Ugly Mug. I absolutely love the work, as you know, of Brendan Constantine, who was my longtime teacher. A big fan of Anne Sexton. I don't know why. Also Emily Dickinson, because people used to say, oh, you sound like Emily Dickinson. I don't get that, but I did fall in love with her work. Now I'm a big fan of a poet named Banu Kapil, who has a marvelous book called The Vertical Interrogation of Strangers. She was one of my teachers at Arojo. There's a million. Harry, I can't narrow it down.
I love Emily Dickinson too. I read her complete poem, 1,789 poems, at least 4 times out loud. So she's just one of the four mothers. So, well, we've come to the end of the program, and I just want to thank you and Jim for such a lovely reading. And I want to just make an announcement. This was our last poetry reading of the year. We've done 182 shows in 3 years and 9 months ever since COVID hit in March of 2020. And I'm just so thankful to Jennifer Clymer for encouraging me to do this, and all the people who work on the Creative Chaos team. They just give this show such an outstanding production value. And so I want to thank you and Jim once again. And we will be off for the next 2 weeks, and we'll be returning on Tuesday, January 9th, 2024, with 2 wonderful poets from New York, Peter Kalafs and Kat Georges. So thank you very much, and happy holidays to all of you. And once again, thank you, Peggy Dobreer and Jim Natal. It's really been an uplifting, pleasurable reading. And thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you. I just want to take a moment before Harry runs away. Another amazing thing happened this year in 2023 as we have a chance to look back and reflect. Harry had a tribute from Beyond Baroque focused just on him. It was this beautiful Zoom gathering, and people shared their memories and their thoughts. And I want to just take a moment to spotlight not just the amazing producer that he is, which I'm so pleased that both of you at the top of the show commented on. This is not an easy thing to do. It is quite the challenge, and Harry has met that challenge every single week to bring incredible artists to this forum. But also as the artist that Harry is, and I'm so happy that you have had the opportunity to be celebrated and to be acknowledged for the work that you bring into our lives.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. I'm thankful for the opportunity. Thank you very much.